Hey guys, what's up? It's Krevin here. Thanks for stopping by and checking out the video. I'm just going to be talking about some of the strategy that I foresee for the Vampire Counts faction in the upcoming Total War Warhammer game that's coming out this 24th. Obviously, the game hasn't come out, so all of the opinions I'm going to be sharing are just that. They're just speculation. This is based off of some of the footage I've seen that CA's released. Footage that other YouTubers have gotten by playing the game with CA, as well as articles that have come out on the forums and stuff like that. But I know that there's a lot of people out there right now that are kind of skeptical about how competitive this faction is going to be in the campaign as well as in the multiplayer. And personally, the Vampire Counts right now are the faction I'm looking forward to playing the most, just because I really enjoy the lore of it. If you want to get into that lore that the vampires have, then I suggest checking out Grey Hunter's channel at Gaming Shenanigans or Arch Warhammer's channel. They have lots of information on the lore behind Warhammer. Myself, I am a Total War gamer, so I had pretty much no experience with Warhammer before I learned that Total War was going to be releasing their new game in the Warhammer universe backdrop. So that's where I'm from as far as the lore comes and experience with Warhammer. But I do have a video out which is on basically the 5 basic factions I'm considering them. That's including the Chaos Warriors because they come with the pre-order, and you also get them if you buy the game within the first week. Alrighty, so let's jump right into some of the concerns that people have for the Vampire Counts. And for a little while, I thought that it was pretty bad that they didn't have any ranged units. And I think that there are plenty of people that still feel that way. The Vampire Counts not having ranged units definitely seems, if you have any kind of Total War background in the previous games. If you don't, and you're just a Warhammer fan, and that's why you're researching this game, and that's why you're interested in buying it, then you might not be experiencing this. But for anyone who's played Total War in the past, not having ranged units would be a huge handicap for a faction. It would make siege battles so much more difficult. There's just a lot that goes into. You can't harass. You have a huge problem with armies that turtle, such as I think the dwarves are going to be that kind of a faction in this game. So a lot of people who have played past Total War games are going to look at a battle versus the vampires and the dwarves and say, wow, the dwarves' heavy firepower from a distance is totally going to wreck the Vampire Counts. This, of course, isn't the only concern when it comes to the Vampire Counts. One of their core units, zombies, at least in the early part of the game, is extremely weak and very slow. Since the Vampire Counts don't have any kind of ranged units, their army's pretty much forced into a kind of rush tactic, where their best case scenario in a battle is going to be closing the gap with another army, limiting the ranged advantage, and basically closing it and cutting down enemy numbers. But usually that's good when you have at least some, fast, maybe not so powerful units that can get there first and close the gap. But as long as they're decent enough to whittle down the enemy while they're there. What we've seen from gameplay, though, is that this is going to be very difficult when you're relying on zombies as the main portion of your army, if this is the kind of tactic you want to follow. And I'll be getting more into what I think the zombies can be used for later on in this video, but right now I'm just expressing some of the possible difficulties and what I believe a lot of people are seeing as major challenges to the undead faction here in this game. But of course, one unit an army does not make. So let's take a look at some of the other units from the unit roster that's been posted on the Wiki Total War page. So not only do they have those zombies, but they also have skeleton warriors fairly early on in the campaign. I think it's from the beginning. Skeleton spearmen. Those are basically the 3 starting units that they really rely on in the campaign, I know. But both the skeleton warriors and the skeleton spearmen aren't much better than the zombies. They have a better attack, and they move faster. That's true too. But they aren't anything significant. They aren't anything that can be relied to hold a line against a very superb force in the early campaign. And those are the units that you basically start off with, like being able to recruit. Them and also the Fellbats. Fellbats are basically flying units, and like the zombies, they're actually labeled by the game as being expendable. I've seen them used pretty much only as diversions in footage that's been released of players playing the Vampire Count faction. Sometimes they'll leave the vampire. Sometimes they'll leave the Fellbats like in front of a wall while they're attacking like a siege city. That way the Fellbats basically just draw enemy fire and act as a meat shield for forces as they advance. Now, I think this is kind of a waste. Personally, I can think of more creative ways to use the Fellbats, and I've actually seen them used once really well, where I actually saw a unit of Fellbats getting 50 kills in a battle. That's right, 50 kills. I don't remember the YouTuber. I also saw in the same battle a zombie unit that had been basically in pretty regular combat and hadn't actually crumbled, which was crazy. But after being in fairly regular combat throughout the entire battle, they'd only gotten 6 kills. So that basically gives you an idea of how aggressive the zombies are as a unit, but it also gives you an idea of how effective the Fellbats can be under the right kind of circumstance. And I think the Vampire Count's main strength does lie in their monstrous units. As far as units go, I think the monstrous units are a huge strength for them. But as I was saying, the skeletons that you start out with, the skeleton warriors and the skeleton spearmen, they aren't much to look at. And it's really only later in the game that you run into some of the more impressive, if you will, units. However, that's later in the game, and you're still running into the problem of no ranged units, so that some of these weaker units, they're going to take a lot of damage when approaching an enemy line. Will there be anything left to actually win a battle with when you reach it? That's the question I think a lot of people are asking. So the Vampire Counts, zombies, and skeletal warriors, I think, are best used in a fashion to bog down an enemy's line and keep him from reinforcing certain areas, or just keep him occupied, keep him busy, draw some kind of reaction from him, while you use your elite units, if you will, to pick off specific enemy units or even to target the general. Now, I think this is a feasible thing for the Vampire Counts, especially because some of their strongest monsters are flying monsters. Now, this doesn't help you too much in the early game because you don't have access to them right off the bat, other than the Fellbats, which I think can be used as a flanking force because they can fly right over enemy units and then swoop down and back and kind of give you a little hammer and anvil effect, just trap their troops in between the Fellbats and your skeletal warriors or something like that. That's going to damage their morale. Also, you can use stuff like the Dire Wolves. You can use the Black Knight Cavalry once you get that. The Dire Wolves you have early in the game, and they're very mobile. Once again, you can use them like the Fellbats. Basically track down, smash into the sides of enemy forces that are locked in combat with some of your weaker units. Or just use them with the Vargulf or something to gang up on a special unit, knock that out, and then just fall onto the backs of the units that are busy with your cannon fodder soldiers. You can't discount some of the other passive abilities that this faction has as well, such as the Vargulf's ability to inspire terror in enemy units. The Terrorgeist, appropriately named, also does this. You have units later on, like the Hex Wraiths, that are basically insubstantial, so they gain 75% less damage from physical attacks, which makes them very hard to kill, while at the same time they're inspiring terror and attacking with deadly sights. So there are some very powerful units in the Vampires faction. I just see what's being viewed as the weakness of the Vampire Counts being well made up for in the fact that they don't rout, so you're going to deal with them almost no matter what. And if you get hit by a unit that's fresh, you're going to be dealing with them for a long time. 2, they inspire terror in your soldiers, who are going to be suffering morale penalties all throughout the combat with them. 3, you have other ones that have abilities like the Hex Wraiths, where they take almost no damage from your average soldier. In the meantime, Your enemy has units. Well, I shouldn't say your enemy. The vampire counts, if you're playing as them, have units that can strike almost anywhere on the battlefield with their very powerful, monstrous units that fly. This means that none of your units are safe. There's no safe position on the battlefield for your general. Some Vargeists are going to descend on him when he starts moving. They're going to trap him. They're going to pin him down. Next thing you know, you got you have the Dark Knights riding up on you. Now your general would have been behind some protective lines, but now he's stuck because of the Vargeist monsters, which flew out of nowhere, and now Black Knights are all around you. Next thing you know, your general's dead, and the match is basically over. So that's kind of how I see the vampires using their abilities to the fullest. Just getting their cheap units in as far as they can, getting the lines muddled, and then striking with their very powerful, monstrous units. And you do have, from the gameplay I've seen, the Vargulf in the beginning of the game. So you have very powerful units from the beginning of the campaign. So let's talk about the vampires and some of their campaign aspects. I think the most significant of these, perhaps, is going to be vampiric corruption. Vampiric corruption is somewhat similar to what religions have been in past Total War games, although I hope it's easier to spread than religions were in the past Total War games. There are specific buildings that spread it for the vampire counts. There's specific heroes that do that. Actually, I think all heroes do that for the vampire counts. And I think there's also some kind of corruption that seeps into enemy lands just for being adjacent to your own. As corruption seeps into enemy lands, public order goes down, and it can actually cause, over time, if it becomes great enough, a undead revolution or revolt in their land, which could help weaken them for your conquest. On the other hand, though, vampire armies and lords can't travel to. Actually, I think it's just armies. I'm not sure about lords. Can't travel to other provinces that don't have any corruption. They suffer attrition. Likewise, enemy armies that travel into your lands where vampiric corruption is high suffer attrition. So this is both a defense, but it also serves to temper your advance. You can't advance without vampiric corruption, or if you do, there's a high probability of you losing. It depends on how bad the debuff is. We just don't know yet. But hopefully they make this gameplay function work a little bit more swiftly than religion worked in the past. However, I'm not annoyed that they have vampiric corruption in. I think it's awesome that the factions of chaos and the vampires both can change the aspect of the campaign map. I think it's very cool. Another ability which I think is probably what makes the vampires one of the strongest factions is that they can actually raise dead on the campaign map. And I've seen a person raise as many as 5 units on the campaign map. Whether that's going to hold true for when the game drops, of course, I'm not sure. But that's a lot of units. I think it was like 3 zombies, 1 skeleton pike, and 1 skeleton warrior. But this means that when you go into a battle, you're almost always outnumbering the other army, which is going to be essential for your army because you need lots of cannon fodder-ish troops to bog down the enemy. It's very reliant on that. Later in the game, I don't think it's going to be as important to bog down the enemy as it will be in the beginning, although you're still going to want to do it. And that's why I think Graveguard, which is basically a more buff, armored, higher attack like unit, which basically copies the skeleton warriors except for they're way cooler, will basically phase out zombies and phase out skeleton warriors and be kind of the bogged down unit of the later game. I think I'd still use them that way, just so that my monsters can have a free range of the field and I can snipe out certain units like the general with them, or take out certain special units like the Griffin Riders or something like that. The Griffin Knights, I should say. Also, the vampires can raise special high-tiered units on the campaign map from the sites of previous battles you fought where high-tiered units died. So I thought that was a very creative thing for CA to add in for the vampires. So to kind of summarize my thoughts on the vampire counts, I think their ability to raise dead in the campaign map and spread vampiric corruption are going to make them a very solid faction choice. It's going to be hard for them to lose land that they've already gained, while at the same time it's going to be a little bit slower on the gaining of provinces and territory, which will keep you from overextending yourself on one hand and will make things a little bit more tactical, as well as the way you plan out large battles. That's going to be interesting as well for the raised dead ability. On the battlefield itself, I think that the ability to basically not break, fear, have no fear, anything like that from the undead units is going to make it very difficult for enemy armies to chew through lots of the early on fodder units and give you plenty of opportunities to move around your heavy hitter units to take them out from behind and hit them from the flanks, or pick out and snipe certain high powered units on the battlefield. Also, with the raised dead ability, kind of returning to that, you're not going to be entering battles with fewer troops than the enemy. Later in the game, you're probably going to fade out a lot of the zombies. You're going to fade out a lot of the skeleton warriors, and you're going to replace them with the grave guard and such units, as well as adding the terrorgeists and varsgeists to your lists, adding to your mobility and making it so you can hit pretty much anywhere on the battlefield. I'm really looking forward to playing as these guys. I think they're, as far as units go and like playstyle, extremely unique, and I can't wait for the drop of this game. So until the next time, guys, feel free to share in the comments below what kind of strategies you have planned for the undead, whether you think they're a good faction or not. I love reading those things and kind of adding to my list of tactical schemes. So till next time.